chapters 12, 13, and 14 all focus on some nitty-gritty usage type things. So it's not exactly grammar, but it's kind of being grouped into that. It helps make your sentences stronger. So these videos are probably going to be pretty short. I think the book does a good job explaining the rules and things, and it's less about me giving the information to you or you reading the information as it is you just learning it and memorizing it. I don't think the information is overly complex, but there are a number of rules that you just have to get used to and that you have to be aware of as you write. So chapter 12 is all about punctuation. It begins with the ending punctuation marks, such as periods, question marks, and exclamation marks. All of them end a sentence. Sometimes you use periods and abbreviations, and that obviously is not the end of a sentence. And really the only ending that you should be using is a period. I don't want you using rhetorical questions in your writing, so you don't really need a whole lot of question marks unless it's in a quote that you're quoting. And you certainly shouldn't be using exclamation marks. So really, the period is just going to be your mainstay when it comes to ending a sentence. So these are the 7 rules of commas, and I know that people have a lot of problems with commas. Everybody does. Outside of this class, most Americans, most English speakers have problems with commas. But here are the 7 rules laid out for you. And like I said a second ago, the issue is not that commas are overly complex. You just have to remember where they go. So I will go over these 7 rules, even though you can always just review them in the book. But really it comes down to you learning them and being aware of them as you write. So when you're writing a sentence and you have a list, you need to make sure that you have a comma, separating the items in your list. If you are writing an introductory clause, you know that you need a comma after that. It's all about writer awareness, and that's not something that I can do for you. So I will review the rules, but it's really up to you to implement them as you write, 1 sentence at a time. You have to go slow, and just be aware. Okay, so elements in the series. This should be pretty common, obvious. You should know this one pretty well. So I love hot dogs, chocolate, and cake. True statement. I do love hot dogs, chocolate, and cake. So the one tricky part with the elements in the series is this last comma. It's called an Oxford comma. Yeah, it does have a name. Shocking. But don't forget the Oxford comma. Sometimes some teachers don't care. It kind of comes down to an issue of style. Well, I'm telling you, have a comma after the last element before the conjunction. So here's the conjunction. Make sure you always have a comma right there. We've learned about independent clauses being separated by a coordinating conjunction. You always have to have a comma there. This should be a review. It's when you've got 2 complete clauses separated by a comma and a conjunction. Introductory elements. We've covered this as well. In the morning, comma. For example, comma. In the meantime, comma. Every time you give some sort of introductory clause, you need a comma after it. It sets it off from your sentence. Again, this is really, really about awareness. If you're writing a sentence that begins in anything sort of close to this example, you probably need a comma. Miscellaneous elements. You learned about essential and non-essential information. That would be one of the elements where you need commas, and we've already covered that. So most of this should be review. You just need to remember these rules as you write. So it's really not that hard. We learned about this one too, coordinate adjectives. When you've got 2 adjectives that you can either flip or put and between, you put a comma there. I won't eat cold, moldy hot dogs. No, I definitely won't eat cold, moldy hot dogs. Okay, so this is another review. Direct quotations. When you say, I shouted, he said, she states, all of that needs to be set off with a comma before the direct quotation. And then the last thing, this one's might be a little vague, but it's when you're contrasting something. So I wanted a hot dog, comma, not a hamburger. Okay, that one's a little trickier. But once you get the hang of commas, they're really not that difficult. It's all about awareness. Shut up about awareness. Now, with semicolons, if you don't know how to use them, don't. It's fine. I'm not going to judge you if you don't use a semicolon at all in your paper. However, I will have to point it out if you use it incorrectly. So here are the two uses. We've already covered this one. Two independent clauses. You can either have a comma and a conjunction when you have two independent clauses, or you can separate them with just a semicolon. Ta-da! And then if you have a series that contains commas within that series, you want to set off the items with a semicolon. So I took this sentence from, I think I trimmed it down, but it is from the textbook. I don't want to write my own. So Mr. Jones, comma, president, semicolon. The semicolon is acting as your comma, but because there's already one there, you use a semicolon. Okay, so here's the other one. All right, semicolons really aren't complicated. Most people just don't use them properly. They do not act as a comma. They act as a period. It's a little less of a stop than a period. Okay, this again should be review. Apostrophes, you use them in contractions, but you're not going to use contractions in your essay, so you really don't have to worry about them. Yay! With possession, make sure if you have a possessive noun that it has an apostrophe in it. If it ends in an S, if the word ends in an S, you can just have the apostrophe. Or if it's plural and ends in an S, you can have an apostrophe without an extra S afterwards. If you use a letter or a number by itself, but it's plural, then you need them there too. Okay, apostrophes aren't too difficult. Colons, you use them to introduce a list. Ta-da! It just kind of creates a stop in there. Kind of breaks up your sentence a little bit, and then you can use it to introduce a quotation instead of a comma, but I would prefer if you just used a comma instead of a colon. Quotation marks. If you ever use a direct quote, which you will be doing at some point in this class, you put quotes around whatever information you're quoting. Make sure you're quoting the information exactly, word for word. No errors, please. If you have an unusual use of a certain word, you can put it in quotes, but I really prefer if my students don't write like that. That's a little too informal, and students get a little confused as to what really does need quotes. So instead of quoting random words, don't quote anything like that. Also, you put quotes around titles of shorter works, such as a poem, or an article, or an essay, or a song. So bigger works like a book title or a title of an album get italicized. Okay, so sometimes you use quotation marks for titles. Awareness. Have I killed the idea of awareness? That's really what it's all about. Just use these rules, learn them, use them as you go. So every time you write a sentence, you should stop and say, what punctuation do I need? That's why I think people have such problems, especially with commas. They're just not aware of the rules, nor do they take the time to be aware and to make sure that they are correct. So if you have any questions about this information, it's all pretty straightforward. But if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to clarify. And just keep practicing. Don't give up. I know people get really frustrated and down with punctuation, but it's not as hard as it looks. Just be aware. Awesome. So if you need anything, just let me know.